Good morning, everyone. We'll just give everybody 30 seconds to connect to audio and everything. Okay, welcome to the first public meeting as part of the Leonard Lake Causation Study consultation process. Thanks so much for joining us virtually today. We really appreciate your willingness to participate in the electronic format of this meeting. My name is Jackie Evans, and I'm the Planning, Policy, and Programs Coordinator at the district. I did want to mention just before we get too far into the meeting that it is being recorded and it will be made available on the Leonard Lake Causation Study page of our Engage Muskoka website. So if you're not comfortable participating, given that it's being recorded, just leave your camera and your microphone off and just continue to watch and listen. And I'd invite you to follow up with me directly afterwards with any input or comments you may have. Causation studies are initiated in accordance with the Muskoka official plan when a lake experiences one of three water quality indicators, one being the occurrence of a blue-green algae bloom. Leonard Lake was chosen for this study based on its history of algae blooms over the past several years, but there are many lakes that have experienced blooms. And Leonard Lake was also chosen based on the fact that it has higher development potential, and the Lake Association has been highly engaged and has been involved in a variety of water quality initiatives to date. There are 4 other causation studies happening concurrently with the Leonard Lake study, and while studies will be unique to each lake, we also have an opportunity to look at factors affecting water quality across the watershed. For each causation study, a team was selected, which includes individuals with expertise in public engagement and in lake science. And together, this consulting team will be studying Leonard Lake and liaising with stakeholders to assist in determining why algae blooms have been occurring. Our project team is really looking forward to the upcoming work on this study, and we look forward to hearing from all of you as well. I think, Jessica, when you're ready, we can start the presentation and we'll go to the second slide, please. Thanks so much. I'd just like to take a few minutes to introduce the other members of the project team. Al Shaw has been an environmental consultant for over 20 years with time spent in both BC and Ontario. The vast majority of his time has been in Muskoka. Since starting Riverstone with his wife in 2008, they have completed many studies that are relevant to this project, including water quality monitoring, lake capacity modeling, and assimilative capacity assessments, as well as peer reviews of these same studies. Francis Wilbur is a planner with EcoView Consulting based out of Peterborough with over 20 years of experience. Francis has worked on a number of both large and small scale consultation projects. And Francis has experience working in both the private and nonprofit sectors, including contracts with the Federation of Ontario Cottagers Association. Jessica Ray Reed is a junior planner with EcoView Consulting. Jessica has experience working with both municipal and private sector clients. She has experience assisting with public open houses and has worked extensively on community engagement related to official plan and zoning bylaw amendments. Colleagues of mine at the district who will be involved in the study and who are on the call today include Christy Doyle, the Director of Environmental and Watershed Programs, Summer Valentine, Director of Planning, and Rebecca Willison, who is our Watershed Planning Technician. And last but certainly not least, we'll be relying on the participation of stakeholders such as yourselves, members of the Lake Association, those who live or work on or near the lake, those who use the lake for recreational purposes, and others who may have important knowledge that is vital to our current and historical understanding of the lake. We also appreciate the participation of our area municipal colleagues, particularly Bryce Sharp, Manager of Planning at the Township of Muskoka Lakes, and we also have Councillor Roberts on the call today of the Township of Muskoka Lakes. Next slide, please, Jessica. Thank you. In terms of project roles, I will be the first point of contact for yourselves, everyone at this meeting today, and other members of the public who need information about the study or who are looking to contribute data or other information. We'll share a slide at the end with my contact information, but after today, if you have any additional information you'd like to share or any questions that weren't answered or any that you think of after the fact, I'd invite you to contact me directly, and I'll be sure to pass along your inquiry to the appropriate project team member. Francis Wilbur from EcoView will be leading the public consultation activities related to this study, including today's meeting. And Al Shaw from Riverstone will be leading the scientific process and technical aspects of the study. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. And with that, I will turn it over to Frances.
Thanks, Jackie. So welcome, everybody. I just want to go over a little bit of housekeeping for the length of this meeting. We're going to be keeping everybody muted throughout the presentation. And then at the end of the presentation, there'll be plenty of time for discussion and question and answer period. That will happen at the end of our presentation. So you'll all be muted, and we'll unmute everybody at the end. If you do have a question that you want to ask throughout the presentation, please put it in the chat function, and we'll try and monitor that throughout the presentation and keep up with the questions as we go. Or you can wait until the very end and we will answer the questions then. We just want to start this by doing a poll to find out where everybody is from. It helps us know who's on the call and just the background of everybody. So if you could answer the question for us, that would be great. And I'll just leave it a couple of seconds to give everybody a chance. So it looks like we've got a number of seasonal residents on Leonard Lake, a couple year-round residents, and some people here who are just interested in the study. Okay, I think that's probably good. Thank you for that. So that shows us that most of the people on the call are either seasonal or year-round residents on Leonard Lake. So thank you for that. Jess, you want to go to the next? Oh, can we close that? There we go. Okay, in terms of today's presentation, I'm going to be doing a little bit of background on the causation studies, and I want to acknowledge that this is probably fairly basic information for some people on the call who have been involved in these kind of studies for a while, but we want to make sure that everybody understands what a causation study is and the point of this causation study. So we're sort of taking a step back and doing it from the very beginning. Al's going to talk about the Leonard Lake study in particular. We'll go through some next steps. And like I said, we'll have some time for question and answers at the end. And we want to hear from you. So this is important for us, as Jackie stated before. Stakeholders are an important part of this project. And we need to get a lot of background information from you. Al will have some questions for people from the association who've been involved for a while. So we'll get to that at the end of the presentation. We do have an hour and a half for today. And if we don't get to all of your questions or all of your concerns, we certainly are available after the presentation. Like we'll give you Jackie's email at the end, and you can contact her if you have questions that aren't able to be answered throughout this presentation. I did see, could you go, yeah, that Mark Scarrow, if he is on the call, if we could unmute him. I was hoping that he could give us a really quick introduction to the association, maybe let us know how many members are part of the association. Just a really quick introduction on the Cottage Association. Is Mark on the call and able to do that for us?
Hang on, he's gonna drop in here.
Okay, that would be
just
great.
Repeat what you want him to do though?
Pardon me?
Can you repeat what you would like him to
just
say?
a really quick introduction to the association. As the association president, I was hoping he could let us know, how many people are a member of the association, any sort of history on the association. And like I said, there's lots of opportunity for questions at the end. This is just a background on the association.
I haven't got your
Hello, this is Ken Riley. Mark has asked me to present on behalf of the Leonard Lake Stakeholders Association. Could I go ahead?
So this is just, if we just could do the quick 2-minute introduction at this point to the association.
Okay.
Is that good?
I'll just make an introduction now. I do have a number of additional points which you can hold until later in this meeting.
If that's okay, if we can just go through the presentation, and there'll be lots of opportunity for that. I was just hoping to have an introduction to the association at this point.
Yes. Our association was founded about 10 years ago. We've been quite an active association. We have about 165 cottages on the lake, and probably, I believe, about 60% of these are members of our Leonard Lake Stakeholders Association. We also have a very active water team, which are somewhat separate from the board activities, who undertake the sampling and our Eyes on the Lake initiative, which has been done for the last 4 years, ever since 2017. At the present time, Mark Scarrow is attending another Zoom conference, the Township of Muskoka Lakes. You may be aware that there is a council meeting which is considering the TML official plan, and our lake plan is being embedded at the present time into that. And so that's why several of our members of our directors are not available today.
Okay, that's great. That's a great introduction, and thank you for that. And we apologize that there was that overlap of meetings, but just so you know, this is being recorded. So if anybody does want to watch it after, it will be up on the Engage Muskoka website. And also there's opportunity to be in touch with Jackie following the presentation if a question wasn't asked or answered during the presentation. Thank you for that introduction. That's very helpful. Next slide, Jess. So we want to just go over quickly, what is a causation study? So again, this is going to be reviewed for some people, but we just want to make sure we aren't missing anybody in the presentation. So a causation study, as Jackie said, determines the causes of lake vulnerability. It's outlined in the official plan to determine the causes and/or relative contributing factor to the water quality indicators for water bodies listed in Schedule E2. So there may be more than one contributing factor. Relative factors is what we call it, and Al will explain the sort of technical terms around that as we get into the presentation. Each lake is different, but a watershed perspective is also important. As Jackie said, this is one of 5 causation studies that are happening at this point. And these 5 studies will be looking at as a whole and as well as individual lakes. So a causation study informs future policy and program changes for the District of Muskoka. A causation study does not create or implement policy, but does inform future municipal policy updates. And a causation study does not create programs at the municipality, but can inform future programs for the municipality. Next slide, Jess. A causation, there is a process outlined in the official plan for each causation study, but as we indicated, the process is outlined and then we refine it for each lake as we go. The overall study process is to assess the existing water quality conditions, look at the historical water quality, model and quantify the sources of nutrients, determine if water quality is deteriorating, and attributing a specific cause or contributing factor to the water quality indicators. So this is the process that's outlined in the official plan. And as Al gets into it, he will talk to you about the specifics of Leonard Lake. And at that, I will give this over to Al to get into more of the specifics of Leonard Lake and to the technical side of the presentation. Thanks, Al.
Great, thanks, Frances. And excuse me, welcome everyone. As Frances said, my name is Al Shaw, and I'm with Riverstone Environmental. I'm very pleased to be part of this this process and to be working with this group. I think we can do some great things here. So this slide, what is a vulnerable lake? As Frances noted, the official plan does describe the causation study process. And it also talks about the water quality indicators that are followed to determine when a lake will be included as a vulnerable lake and included in this causation process. First is a long-term significant increasing trend in phosphorus concentration over time. And that's considered to be looking at the 5 spring phosphorus concentration measurements. Secondly is a long-term high concentration of phosphorus greater than 20 micrograms per liter, and that's calculated as the average of the 5 most recent spring values. And 20 is an important value because where concentrations are continuously above 20, there's a much higher probability of algae blooms happening. And then of course, the final reason why a lake would be considered vulnerable is if a blue-green algae bloom has been confirmed by the province. And sort of why are the factors important? And they really, the factors, they are either known to contribute to the likelihood of algae blooms, being the phosphorus concentrations long-term, or they confirm that an algae bloom has actually already occurred. And we can all certainly agree that the occurrence of algae blooms are not desirable at all. Worst case scenario is that they are toxic and can impact our health and health of the lake ecology. And really the best case scenario with an algae bloom is that they're just extremely unsightly and degrade our enjoyment of the lake. Can you go on to the next slide, please? Hutchison Environmental Sciences completed an initial causation study on Penn Lake in 2020. I'm sure you're aware of that. And this included a great deal of public consultation. And what they did was review existing and newly collected water quality data. But they also developed really a framework that the other causation studies, such as the one for Leonard Lake here, were going to use as the basis for their investigation. And the framework was really intended to take that historical and newly collected data on water quality and algae and understand the importance of the contributions of ecology and shoreline watershed development, climate on the relative contribution, I guess, of those factors for the potential for algae blooms. And in this case, we're going to do the same thing as it applies to Leonard Lake. If we can go on to the next slide there. Hutchison developed what they called a weight of evidence approach in the Peninsula Lake initial study. And I like to look at it more of a multiple lines of evidence type approach. And essentially the idea is that the historical and new data collected for algae blooms and water quality, and that's particularly phosphorus, and there gets to be elements of dissolved oxygen as well, and then climate as well, and can provide insight needed to really understand what's driving the proliferation of algae. Each data stream for Leonard Lake will need to be developed and analyzed to assess, the changes over time and long-term time as well. Any step changes over that period, and really a step change is where data seems to be following a very standard trend and then shows a jump in change. So understanding the current conditions, lake as well, and analyzing the algae community from the various provincial sampling events, as well as the Lake Association data. And I understand the Lake Association is quite active in algae sampling as well. And then also reviewing the deep water oxygen and nutrient status, which I think some of you know can lead to what's called an internal load. What this will all contribute to are the multiple lines of evidence related to the stream of ecology data and climate and water quality. And what that does is hopefully point to the possible reasons for algae blooms in Leonard Lake. If we can go on to the next slide there. There's some additional items that the causation study for Leonard Lake will review and we'll look at, but really the point I want to make on this slide is that the district and provincial data related to water quality and algae are already being compiled, and we plan to get additional data this year to complement the district data. And that will include sampling phosphorus through the summer and into the fall, and as well as dissolved oxygen profiles and deep water phosphorus. As I said, that can be an indicator of an internal load of phosphorus. But I understand that and I don't have much experience with the Lake Association, but I understand they're very active, and that there is a great deal of data that the Lake Association has either collected themselves or have even commissioned through studies of their own. And I know some of these data have been submitted already to the district to be included as part of this, but I'm urging everyone to make sure that through this presentation, if something else comes to mind or other data that might exist, that you forward that information on. If we could go to the next slide, please. The historical data that I've mentioned really includes the mid-lake spring data that was collected by the district over a number of years, and they test for a number of chemical parameters in addition to phosphorus for sure. The lake partner data that basically I think is sampled by the Lake Association and submitted to the Ministry of Environment for analysis of phosphorus and among other things. And I believe through the lake partner data, I took a quick look at it, and it seems like there were 3 different stations sampled, although that may vary from year to year, whether all 3 sampling sites were collected. And also in discussions and communication with the Ministry of Environment, there were several incidences of blue-green algae blooms that were noted by the Lake Association and pointed out to the Ministry of Environment, and they've collected samples, and I believe that started somewhere around 2017. And I must admit, I haven't got into all the details and dates of the specific algae blooms, but I understand there were a number of confirmed cases of algae blooms. Really, and I'm aware that Leonard Lake probably has one of the most active associations in the district, particularly as it relates to water quality. And we really want to capitalize on that activity to get all the data that is available to be included in this analysis and really put into the heart and soul of this study. Next slide, please. Oh, perfect. Really, this slide is to break up all the wordy slides that have been up there so far. It's a map that I'm sure everybody is familiar with of Leonard Lake. It's got the lotting fabric around the lake. It also shows in the center, there's a yellow star in there that is that locates the midwater deep zone sampling station that the district has been using over the years. And certainly as part of our assessment, we'll be including and bringing in all of the other data, the lake partner data, to update that figure to show where all the sampling stations will be, or that have been sampled historically, and new sampling stations. Probably will be sticking to very similar to the district sampling stations throughout the summer and fall, but this is a figure really just to show the lake and the lotting around it and historical district sampling location. We can go on the next one. This is some data that has been presented previously in the causation study for Peninsula Lake. And it's an example of an algae bloom and details for that happened in Sturgeon Bay. But really, algae blooms can occur for a number, based on a number of different reasons. Most often considered is an increase in phosphorus in the surface water, and this can occur through changes in land use, point sources of nutrients into the lake. It was established quite a while ago, I believe it's over 50 years ago, that particularly in Precambrian shield lakes, that phosphorus is the nutrient that primarily controls the growth of aquatic plants, including algae. And essentially more phosphorus can lead to more plant growth and more algae. Temperature is also a factor that influences algae growth. So a warmer water column can certainly favor algae species growth, particularly blue-green algae. There are also species of algae that are able to gather nutrients from sediments as opposed to just the water column. So those the presence of those types of species can certainly contribute to the potential for algae blooms. And as Frances noted earlier in her introduction, several of these factors can really work together, where warmer temperatures can make the lake stratify earlier, which in turn can reduce oxygen in the lake bottom. So a lot of these things can certainly compound and cause algae blooms to happen where we haven't seen them before. And finally, there's also other nutrients like iron and nitrogen that are required by algae that can be somewhat influential in their growth, not as controlling as phosphorus, but certainly can contribute to growth. So I think that's all I wanted to say right now. As Frances said before, this is a bit of a higher level overview of algae blooms and what's going to be happening in this causation study. But I hope it gives everyone a bit of an overview, certainly of a little more technical information, but certainly I understand that a number of people on the association have quite advanced knowledge, and I certainly look forward to hearing comments from those folks as well. But this was just an overview to make sure that everybody was understanding the basics of what's going to go on. And I'll hand it back to Frances now.
Great, thanks, Al. So as Al said, I'm just going to go over now what you can expect from this causation study. So Al's going to start to review all of the available scientific data. We're hoping as part of this call that we gather some more data. The information that was shared previously, Al will start to review. There will be conclusions and recommendations coming out of this causation study, and you can expect them to be defensible conclusions and recommendations. We just want to remind everybody that change is future forward. We all have a role to play in this causation study. And what a causation study is not, it's not an original research project. We're not doing a site-by-site review of development on the lake. It's all encompassing, and it may be unanswered questions that require further work. So we're anticipating that some of the recommendations that we come up through this causation study will involve further study that needs to be done. The conclusions of the study will assist the district in determining whether the lake will be subject to the standard or enhanced protection policies of the official plan. Next slide. And conclusions for this lake, for the causation study, will both be micro and macro level. So what we mean by that is that the conclusions will be actionable recommendations for each citizen on the lake, actionable recommendations for the district, and actionable recommendations for the wider community. So as we said, this is one of 5 causation studies that are taking place at the same time. We anticipate that the recommendations will be watershed-based as well as very specific to each citizen on the lake. So next slide, in terms of where we are in the process, so the RFP was issued and awarded to both EcoView and Riverstone. We've had a startup meeting between us and the district where we planned and confirmed the project roles and planned the consultation process. We started to gather some of the data, so Al has started to review that. We've identified past studies and the existing data, and Al has started to identify the initial gaps in data. So that's part of this first meeting, is we are hoping to gather the information from the Cottage Association and help identify any gaps in the study. And as we go through the process, Al may identify other gaps that are needed throughout the study. If we could go to the next slide, Jess. So in terms of the project timeline, so today is the first public meeting. We're launching a survey later this week where we are going to be collecting more data. Over the spring, summer, and fall, Al will be looking at data gathering and the analysis. We plan to have a second public meeting in the fall of 2021. And at that second public meeting is where you can expect to see some of the recommendations from the study. There'll be a draft report early in 2022, and the final report will be presented to the District Community and Planning Services Committee in mid-2022. So how can you help? We need local knowledge of your lake. So as we all know, there's been lots and lots of work done on Leonard Lake, and we want you to share that information with the project team. The terms of reference for the project will incorporate your feedback and will be updated throughout the project. Specifically, the kind of data that we were looking for is any data that you have on historical weather patterns, water quality sampling data, information on point sources, historical observations. And as I heard, the lake plan is, I think I heard it's being implemented maybe by the, not the district, the township at this point. So we would appreciate an update on the lake plan and where that's at, or any photos that you have on the lake in terms of water quality, and we'll explain to you how to share that data as we go on. So that's the next slide so the best way to share your data, so that we are launching a survey in the next couple of days. Jackie will explain how to contact her to submit data. And we ask that you continue to monitor this summer and send any data that you have to the district throughout the summer. Visit Engage Muskoka and subscribe for project updates. So with that, I'm going to send it back to Jackie where she can tell us how to stay in touch with her. And following that, we'll open it up for questions and comments. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Francis. Yeah, so for those on the call who haven't already, if you would be willing to visit our Engage Muskoka page, the URL is right there. You'll click on the project that says Protecting Muskoka's Vulnerable Lakes Causation Studies, and then on that page, scroll down and click on Leonard Lake, and it will take you to the specific Leonard Lake Causation Study page. In the top right-hand corner of that page, there is an option to subscribe to project updates. And so via the Engage page, that's where we'll be posting all of the key project milestones. So when the terms of reference is ready, we'll be posting it on there. When the survey is up and running, we'll post the link on Engage. And every time we post kind of one of these key documents or milestones, we will also send out an email to the page subscribers. So you'll get a notification that something has been posted to the page. And that's really the best way to follow the project going forward if you're interested. So we would ask that you consider doing that. As well, feel free to get in touch with me anytime. My email is on the screen here, and it's also on that Engage page as well. Any questions, concerns, information you'd like to share, feel free to get in touch with me. I think that's all I had to say, Francis.
Okay, great. That's great. Thanks, Jackie. So if Jess, you can stop sharing your screen now. That's the end of the official presentation from our end. So what we'd like to do now is try and open it up for questions and answers. And this is a bit tricky when we're all doing this on Zoom, but I'm hoping that if you had a question, if you're not comfortable chatting, just please, you can type it into the chat box. And if you do want to ask a question, if you could just raise your hand or let us know that you're interested in asking a question by turning on your camera or using one of the reaction buttons, we can unmute you so that we can get into those questions. So should we start the process with, it wasn't Mark, sorry, there was somebody who said that they wanted to speak on behalf of the association.
Yes, this is Ken Riley. Can you hear me?
Ken, yeah, sorry about that, Ken. So if you wanted to start us off with your questions or comments, that would be great.
Okay, thank you, Francis. Yeah, I would only like to take 5 or 10 minutes, perhaps, to go through a lot of the points that Al had referred to in terms of the kinds of work that we've been doing and kind of the, you might say, the indicators that we suspect might have a causation role here. First of all, I appreciate very much the District of Muskoka providing, I think, very generous funds for commissioning this study, and also to Riverstone in undertaking it. And I do look forward to very good outcomes from this. As I mentioned, Mark and several other Directors wanted to be here, but there was this conflict. But we do look forward to our lake plan getting embedded into the Township of Muskoka Lake official plan. Steve, Wojciech, Esther, and Bill, I believe, are all on the call, and they have been closely involved as part of the water quality team in taking a lot of this data and collecting it as well. Now, as Al mentioned, we are fortunate in having a long history and I think a good amount of sampling studies, not just by ourselves, but by Dorset, Muskoka Lakes, etc. over the years, even going back to the 1970s, where we have data from the Ontario Water Resources Commission. Those were in the days before phosphorus was even known as a prime indicator of water quality concerns on lakes. So we look forward to sharing all this with your team. As mentioned, we have a number of volunteers carrying out water testing, particularly, I would say, since 2017. We've had an Eyes on the Lake program, we call it, where any water quality concerns are reported by our stakeholders, and we follow up. We particularly mentioned two online studies that have been, I think that Al maybe have mentioned these in passing. They were commissioned by our association. One was in the summer of 2017, when the lake was extensively sampled. Dr. Sue Watson and Hetty King, who many of you know, they're well-known limnologists, undertook the writing of this study. It was algae and water quality on Leonard Lake. And there's a lot of data in that report. In addition, Gertrude Nuremberg has done a couple of studies for us on Leonard Lake vulnerabilities, which was included in the Dropbox. However, what was not included in the Dropbox, I point out, it was anecdotal reports. And we do have many of these, and I know that many association members do have very important points of information that I think on a one-to-one basis, they should be involved with. Now, I'd just like to mention a number of highlights and concerns here. As I understand, and Esther can correct me here, we've had 12 confirmed cyanobacteria blooms between 2017 and 2020. In addition, one chrysophyte bloom, this is a Uroglena, it's a true algae, but it occupied the entire lake for about a full month. And it smelled very bad because it's a very high fatty acid content, and it hung around for a full 6 weeks before it dispersed. Now, these have been extensively documented, particularly by Esther, and are available. The way we proceed often is to immediately call the Spill Action Center. These are often peripheral or blooms around the shoreline, and we would even call them ephemeral, in that they would last only a short time. And many times, by the time that the officer from the Ministry of Environment arrived, we did not see the bloom, or a motorboat would go past and disturb it. But one of the points I would like to focus is that when we summarized the water temperature on across the season over 4 years, and when these blooms were occurring, we saw a very clear pattern. When the water was still, when there was higher than normal temperatures for that time of the year, and we have had blooms all the way from May up until November, but when the water temperature was higher, we did find that there was more likelihood of blooms. So I think very clearly weather, and we might even say ultimately the climate change might be playing a role here, but we don't consider that as being the underlying cause. And I'd just like to finish by maybe suggesting 6 that we see as being important. One is that we found extensive anoxia in the lake. I'd just like to point out that the central location that was mentioned at the district samples is not the location where we've been finding anoxia. We've been finding it in the north site as well as in the south site. But what we haven't been able to identify is whether that is leading to a phosphate release, an internal load, you might say. And I think this is a question that really does need to be answered. Whether that can be part of the study intensively, we hope. Second is that we've identified that the blooms all occur on the western and southern nearshore areas of the lake, in all cases. Even though we have westerly winds that you'd think would blow them across to the east side, this doesn't happen. And we suspect that perhaps nutrient inflow is happening somewhere along the western side. If you look at Al Shaw's map of the lake, you'll see that the Leonard Lake Road 2 borders very closely that shore. There's many culverts there, there's very thin soil, and we suspect that there could be an inflow of nutrients into the western shore as well. This has been postulated by Lewis Mallow and others, that there could be these two different sources of phosphorus that come together to create a bloom. Third is that calcium has declined, and often if you look at the Lake Partner Program data, is below around 1.7 or less, which can influence or damage the web of life and has been shown to lead to blooms. Next would be septics. We don't know how many good functioning systems are on the lake, but we suspect there's many which are not. And we do need more information on this. What part of the total inputs might be coming from septics. And then finally, a couple of anecdotal pieces of information from me. One is on water stagnation. Our farm, as you may know, passes, the outflow of the lake passes right through the farm. And so for the last 70 years, I guess I've been able to observe that flow. A dam was constructed at the outflow about 40 years ago. Prior to that dam being constructed, there was no interruption of the flow. It was continuous. I think we all remember that. After the dam was constructed, there was often stagnation between June and November. I would say in most years. There's been some years when it continues all the year, but there's now much more water stagnation than there used to be. Finally, periphyton on the rocks. I've noticed that there's quite a buildup. That's been happening over the years. As you know, that's an indicator of possible pollution coming in or deterioration of water quality. Perhaps the periphyton data might be investigated as well. So finally, I don't know whether you want to talk about our 2021 plans, but we are looking forward, and I think everybody who is on this Zoom meeting joins me in looking forward to sampling both with the Muskoka Watershed Council algae program, as well as with the Lake Partner program, and undertaking the watch to make sure that we record any blooms that might be occurring. So we do welcome Riverstone Bay to work. We wish to work closely with them and look forward to frequent interactions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Al, do you want to do you have anything, questions or follow up?
The insight and the data and everything, it's just tremendous. It really is. I'd almost be I'd almost be worried if we showed up to one of these causation studies and there wasn't some level of responsibility, some level of real interest in water quality. But this is tremendous. It really is. The amount of initiative that everybody has put into monitoring the water quality on the lake. Clearly, there's a lot of people here that have a very high interest in water quality, not just passing, a very high interest in monitoring water quality and keeping the conditions in Leonard Lake really good. And it's absolutely tremendous. And I look forward to taking a look at all of this data and putting it all together to see really what sort of picture comes out of it. Greatly appreciate the efforts, actually. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
I'll reiterate that. It's very helpful to have people so interested in the study for sure. Bev, you had said hello, so I'm not sure. Does that mean, do you have a question that you'd like to ask? If so, yes, you do. Okay, I can unmute you. Or you can unmute yourself, I think.
I'm
There we
sorry,
go.
yes.
Okay.
I was just in the middle of typing it, so this is much better.
Okay.
My understanding, Ken mentioned that perhaps there was something along Leonard Lake Road 2 that was significantly influencing what's happening on our lake. And it's a little bit before my time. I never used it, but I understand that there was a garbage dump at one point that was just beyond Leonard Lake Road 2, west of the intersection of Road 2 and Highway 118. And the reason that I know that is that someone was rebuilding a cottage that was down on that portion of the road closer to 118. And they had to do some ground studies to ensure that there was no leaching of anything from a garbage dump that was apparently there at some point into their property. So perhaps is that something that could be influencing what's going on the lake?
Al, do you want to answer that? Or
Yeah, great question, Bev. Yeah, it could be a point source if depending on what kind of dump it was there. Sometimes I know my company gets involved with that sometimes when folks are looking to do something on their property, and when the district looks into and does pre-consultation with somebody trying to develop their property or expand their property. They have a map that the Ministry of Environment has put together that identifies all the historic dumps. And they could be garbage dumps. They could also be what they call stump dumps, where they had an area where people could drop off wood or stumps of trees that were dug out of the ground. So depending on the type of dump it was, yeah, it could possibly be a point source of nutrients. And I think knowing that somebody there had done a study, it would be available to the district, and we can look into that a little bit further.
I've been on the lake since 1955, Bev, and I distinctly remember going with my dad down to that dump. We hung a right on 118. It was about a half mile, maybe a mile down the road. We used to go down there and watch the bears and dump our stuff. But, you know, talking about the lake and that dam, in 1955, there was a substantial beaver dam across that outlet, and it trickled all summer long. It never stopped flowing like it does now. It was about maybe 3 feet high. When we were kids, you could run across it to the other side. But once the beaver dam got blown out of there, according to my father, it was land developers who wanted to increase the size of their property. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I was just a kid. But when that beaver dam was there, it was naturally dammed up, and it just trickled all summer long. You could sit down on a ledge where the falls are, and it was like a little shower, and it ran all summer, but doesn't do it now.
that's really helpful information. This is the kind of stuff that we're looking for, is this local knowledge that that we need to collect as part of the study. So I'd encourage, if you don't share it today, if you think of something, or Bev, include that in the survey that we put out, and we can then do that background research to see how it does influence the causation studies. So thank you for sharing this kind of information.
We had a real bear problem for a couple of years after they closed that dump and moved it over into Bracebridge. But for a while there, they were just prowling the woods looking for garbage, I'm sure.
That's right.
Okay, thank you, Rob. I've got a couple questions here in the chat box. So we'll start with, can someone explain the loss of calcium in the water and soil, and can that be remediated? Al, are you able to talk about the calcium in the water and soil?
Yeah, I can talk about it a bit. There's been information gathered and studies done to show that the decline in calcium in the water column is occurring, and it's occurring across the board. I think it has a lot to do with acid rain. So previously, when acid rain would come down, it would leach the calcium out of the soils and it would run into the lake. Therefore, they had quite high concentrations of calcium in the lakes. And of course, as things have been done in order to curb acid rain, the leaching of that calcium into the lakes has halted a great deal, and much of the calcium had already been has been leached out of the soils, so that it just isn't available anymore. There are programs around Muskoka that I believe is it Friends of the Muskoka Watershed, I believe, are running a program where they will actually take in the ash from your wood stove, and what they do is they spread it out in the forest, along the forest floor, as a means of replenishing that calcium, so that again it will be able to be leached, not at a very fast rate as it was with acid rain, but at a slower rate with regular rain, back into the lakes. So really, that's the work being done by the Friends of the Muskoka Watershed. I know I take my ash bucket and I just throw it in my own forest in the back there, and hopefully it contributes downstream into closest big lake, I guess, is Lake Muskoka for my place. But that's my understanding of the calcium deficit and the program that's being used in order to try to replenish that.
Thanks, Al. We have a question from Steve. Steve, do you
Sure,
want to
yeah.
unmute?
Yep.
Here you go, Steve.
I did notice in the presentation that each recommendation will be assigned to a stakeholder, and in reviewing the Penn Lake study, I noticed that was lacking. So am I correct to assume that, if there's a recommendation and multiple stakeholders have a role to play in implementing that action, then that will be assigned? And is there also the ability over time to look at the effectiveness of that recommendation over time to see if it worked, and if not, be able to tweak that or change it, just to ensure it's effective?
That's a great question, Steve. And so what we're saying in the recommendations is we anticipate what those recommendations are. We don't know for sure at this point. And the previous causation study was a pilot, so we've learned from that. And one of the things is that the recommendations, we will be talking about specific and defensible recommendations. Now, I'm not sure about the monitoring following the causation study. That wouldn't be something that this project team would be doing, but I don't know if Jackie, if you can talk to the long-term evaluation of causation studies, or if somebody from the district can answer that question. If not, we can certainly get back to you, Steve, because that's an important part of this as well.
Thanks, Francis. I might defer to Summer or Christy on that one.
Okay, Summer or Christy, I'm not sure who's the best person. Here we go.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I have a home learner here with me, and my internet is quite taxed at the moment with respect to her activities and mine. So I apologize if I cut out, but thanks, Steve, for your question. And the pilot study that you mentioned on Peninsula Lake was the first undertaken by the district. So now that council has moved to selecting 5 lakes across the watershed, we'll have a bundle of causation studies and recommendations to look at. And depending on what those tell us, either individually for the lakes being studied, such as Leonard Lake, or perhaps patterns that we might see to be implemented across the watershed, that's when staff would go back to our Community and Planning Services Committee and by larger extension council and make some recommendations on how we might move forward. And that could include widespread tracking or implementation of the recommendations across the watershed or to individual lakes. So this is all to come. And certainly we do want to make sure what we are implementing at a planning level through policy or through programs is successful. So that follow-up and tracking, depending what the recommendations are, would certainly be looked at as a part of it.
Thank you very much, Summer. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I don't know if other people had, oh, Esther, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? If you want to unmute yourself, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I've been part of the water quality team for some years now. One of the things I wanted to point out is that Canada geese and cormorants were not part of Leonard Lake a number of years ago. They are a fairly recent change, and possibly are some of the sources of extra phosphorus in the lake at the present time. Another point that I wanted to make was that the lake is apparently spring fed. So when you're talking about inputs and outputs, I don't really know what would affect the input from those springs. That might be something to think about. The other question that we've been talking about is in the study that was done in 2017 by Sue Watson. She did identify cyanobacteria in the deep water sites in late August, but they were not the same species as we saw in the blooms. So this is a puzzle. So yes, you had the very small pico cyanobacteria that were found in the deep water sites, but what we saw in the blooms was consistently Dolichospermum, which is the buoyant colony forming type of cyanobacteria. So this kind of discrepancy is still a puzzle to us. So we're looking forward to having more information on some of these questions that have come up over the last few years. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if you can speak to any of those yet, but I heard three questions, one around Canada geese and cormorants, one around spring fed, and the other one around the species of the blooms. So I don't know if you can answer those yet, or whether that's something you have to look into.
Sure, they're all things that we'll certainly consider and look into. As far as geese and cormorants, my initial feeling is that they wouldn't provide enough phosphorus in their droppings in order to create, to be considered a big point source of phosphorus. But again, it's definitely something to look at. Spring fed, groundwater tends to be very nutrient poor, comes in with very low oxygen and low nutrients. So it's not necessarily a point source, but again, when I combine that with something like an old dump nearby that comes from, that was originally mentioned by Bev and noted by Rob there, it's something else that should be looked into. As far as the species of algae that are found in the deep water versus what was identified in the bloom, certainly even a bloom, when you take samples of at the surface, you're going to have more than one species in it. There will be one dominant species, but there will be others that will be there as well. So it's not uncommon to have more than one species present in a sample, but it is intriguing to have one species dominant in the bottom and another one dominant at the surface. So again, it's definitely a question that is intriguing, and we will consider it fully.
Thanks, Al. I have a question from Vicky, and then Steve, I do know that you have a follow-up question, but maybe I'll just ask Vicky's first about deer wintering and whether their feces would be a consideration if we're along the same lines as the geese.
Yeah, I think it's along the same lines as the geese. If there's a deer yard there, it would take an awful long time for all of that material to get into the ground and then ultimately make its way toward the lake. So I'm not dismissive of it. Certainly, we'll look into it. But my initial thoughts are that you know, that's a long way to go for a phosphorus in deer droppings to get all the way to the lake to be influential in overall lake nutrient status.
Thanks, Al. Steve, do you want to go back and ask? Steve had a follow-up question.
Yeah, it's somewhat related. I did note in the presentation that there's 3 typical vulnerabilities that the lake program water quality model looks at. Leonard Lake didn't check the first 2 boxes in terms of high phosphorus levels or increasing trends. As part of the study, will you potentially look at what other parameters may be helpful in monitoring water quality in addition to phosphorus, so that we can get a bigger picture and a more consistent picture, because we didn't sort of fit the box?
Great question, Steve. Again, it just shows the depth of knowledge that's really coming from this lake associates. It's fantastic. Yeah, you know, typically we've learned over a lot of years that phosphorus is the one. It's the one that controls things. But now we're starting to see things. We're starting to see algae species, and it was mentioned that I think by Ken that one of the species was. I'm going to look back at my notes. Maybe was it Uroglena, a golden brown algae? Those algae don't need 20 micrograms per liter to bloom. They don't need very high concentrations of phosphorus to bloom. They need 5, 6, 7 to bloom. So our understanding, our historical understanding of algae and what caused them to bloom, being phosphorus, was implemented, and changes were implemented in order to curb the phosphorus. But we're still seeing blooms. So, Steve, it's a great question. There may be other chemical parameters out there that are more indicative to blooming of these different species that we're starting to see now in Muskoka that we hadn't before. So certainly we will be looking into those sorts of ideas for sure. And
probably the district will take all of the recommendations from these 5 and build on that for the next ones that they do, I'm sure. These are sort of an evolving process in terms of these causation studies. Yeah. We had a couple questions in the, oh, Rebecca, do you want to say something to that question?
Yeah, thank you, Francis. I just want to just follow up with Al's response in terms of what's monitored. The District of Muskoka Monitoring Program collects about 47 different parameters. So as you can imagine, we have a fair bit of data for the lake, not just nutrients and phosphorus. So all of that information has been provided to Al, and I'm sure when he looks at what species are specifically found in the lake, some of those species like other conditions as well. So high iron might favor one species over another. So he will have a lot of that information to look up as well.
That's great. Thank you, Rebecca.
Back in the late 60s, early 70s, the gasoline companies had this great new invention called detergent gas. Well, the detergent was phosphorus. And I can distinctly remember people coming up to the lake, their motorboats, and they would leave a foamy trail behind their boats, which didn't happen a couple of years prior to that. So I don't know if they're still doing that, but phosphorus in the gas, if you're not using marine gas, you should. Yeah, it's a little more expensive, but it's not pumping phosphorus into the water.
Yeah, and those are the kind of recommendations, you know, where we talk about citizen-led recommendations as well, right? We can all do our part, and those are the kind of recommendations that certainly will be part of the causation recommendations. I've got a couple questions in the chat that I think probably you could do together. So what about development on the lake? And then boat activities, such as the number and types of boats and stirring up the bottom of the lake? Or those are the kind of things that you're also looking at?
Yeah, oh, definitely. Development around the lake. We all know that phosphorus comes from septic systems, and older ones are a lot worse at sending out nutrients than newer systems. Generally, newer ones are set further back. Older ones can be right up against the shoreline. We've seen them with no sort of formal treatment at all. So yes, those are things to consider as well. And I can't remember when Ken was giving his talk there, whether he mentioned, I can't remember whether he mentioned there were septic inspection programs. I think there is something from the municipality on that. So some of that data will definitely come into play for sure.
Okay, and anything about boat activity? Do you have any comments on boat activity?
Rob got into it already with detergents in the gas and stuff, but yeah, boating activity. I don't know if it's a major contributor. Just my initial thoughts. Certainly there'll be more in-depth look into that as well. But yeah, to me, if it was a big contributor, you might see that in the sampling that's been done. But again, you know, everything's on the table. We'll definitely be looking at it.
Great, thanks, Al. Now, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Does anybody? Does anybody want to share any background information with Al that they have, that they think might be important? This isn't your only opportunity. There's lots of time to share information, but.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to chat.
That's okay. You can just talk to us. That's good too. Did you want to talk? Oh.
I think you might be on mute there, Ken.
I'm on mute. Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's just a point about the monitoring stations on the lake. We presently have 3, one in the north, one right in the South Bay, and one in the center. It is in the center where the district of Muskoka has historically been taking the data. But we have not been finding anoxia at that station. We have asked recently the Lake Partner Program to include monthly sampling at the other 2 sites because they are important. So whether we can perhaps try this year to get them to agree to this, we know they have constraints. I'm certainly sympathetic to that on their resources, but I think it'd be very important to get phosphorus at least, as well as anoxia, oxygen sampling at all these sites during the season.
Thank you. Yeah, it would be helpful to have that, I'm sure. Rob, did you have something that you wanted to? I noticed you were.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we are going to have to deal with is the fact that about 1977, 1978, good old Sudbury raised their smokestack about 600 feet up into the air and promptly started distributing air pollution all the way out to Halifax and Prince Edward Island. You could see it in the sky, and acid rain, as we know, also creates acid snow. And if you'll think back, most of the little bays were full of lily pads, and they just started to disappear. Frogs have disappeared. You don't hear bullfrogs anymore. They lay their eggs in the top surface of the water, and if it's acidic, they just don't hatch. I know my aunt used to come up every year and roam the woods to get perfect maple leaves for the Thanksgiving table, and in 1978, she couldn't find a single one. All the leaves had burn holes in them, and they still do on occasion. That's acid rain. So I don't know what we can do about that, because that certainly has a huge impact on the water. And when I was a kid, you drink the water, you could see down on the bottom in 30 or 40 feet of water, and bottom fish, you could actually see the fish coming to your bait. Can't do that anymore.
Yeah, certainly. We all agree. It has changed. And part of this causation study is to help us figure out why and how and make some recommendations. We had a question in the chat about the old gas station, which I think,
I remember that. There was a dance hall down there, and there was even an ice hut that they used to cut ice off the lake. And there was cabins in there you could rent. But yeah, there was a gas station there. There was a marina. And the evidence of the dock is gone now, but it was right beside the boat launch. There was a substantial building there. We used to have little dances in there.
that all of those kind of things, I'm sure, will be looked at. It's historical data that Al will be looking at for the study. Was there anything else? We had an encouraging message in the chat there. Anybody else that wanted to share? And this, again, not your last opportunity. We'll be launching the survey at the end of the week, and lots of opportunity to share. And if you have questions, Jackie's available to forward them our way. Oh, Esther did have one. You want to unmute yourself? Thank you.
Yes, I was just going to comment on two things. One, the pH of the lake has been going up in recent years, so I think the acid rain problem has been going away, has been corrected to some extent over recent years. In terms of the calcium in the lake, I recall seeing a study of a number of lakes in Muskoka, and the calcium level was going down in most of them except Dickey Lake. And they found the reason why the calcium levels were still good in that lake was because they were using calcium chloride on the roads around there as during the winter to melt the ice. And in fact, that had a positive effect on the calcium levels in that lake. So just an interesting sort of finding that wasn't intentional, but may have had good effects. Something to think about.
Thank you, Esther.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one, Esther. Bit of a double-edged sword, having roads very close to the shoreline of the lake, which really isn't ideal, but at the same time, the unintended benefit of having the salt or the calcium chloride beef up the calcium concentrations in the lake. Definitely an interesting dichotomy there.
Okay, I'm just looking again, and I want to say Summers reminded everybody on the survey or directly with Jackie, if you could be specific as possible in your information that you provide to us. So Rob, specifically where the gas station was or where some of these point sources were, that would be very helpful for Al to get that specific information. So that would be great to supply that.
How we ended up on Leonard Lake was my parents were driving along 118 and they went past this lodge, Chaz Gage, and they had properties for sale. So we ended up getting in a little boat and sailing out to the bay, and that's when my parents looked at the property and they bought it. So, and it was $770 for 110-foot frontage.
Excellent return on investment there.
Yeah. Al, do you want to comment at all about any specific data that you are looking for based on what you've heard today, or?
There's nothing jumps out at me other than I have been in contact with the Ministry of Environment, and their comment back to me was, you're too slow. The Lake Association has already asked for this information very recently. So I got an email response with the same data. I'm sure that was sent to whoever it was on the Lake Association that was that had requested that information. What I did then was request back to have more detailed information. They gave me a little table with incidents of calls from the Lake Association, or members of the public on the lake, related to an incidence of algae, and then an incidence number that they have. And I really wanted the full reports and stuff. And he said that you're welcome to that information if I go through a Freedom of Information Act request. So if the Lake Association has done that already and has that information on the data from the MECP, if that could be provided, that would be wonderful. If not, I will be going through that process in order to get that information.
Thanks, Al. Can anybody answer that, or we can put that off until? Okay, so all LLSA MECP info has been provided in the Dropbox. So Al will take a look at that for sure.
I
We
will
did
be
have one
combing
question.
through that information.
Okay, great. We did have one question here, Al. I'm not sure whether you can answer it because it's about the MECP, but in the event of future cyanobacteria blooms, will MECP and water quality teams test all regular test sites to determine extent of algae blooms? Not sure we can answer that, but
Yeah, I know in doing some work for the district last year on other lakes, their scope is pretty limited for what they do. They will take information if somebody calls to say there's an algae bloom occurring on my lake. They will take that information, determine whether they will send a water quality team. And if they do, they come out and as maybe Ken said before, sometimes by the time they get out there, the algae bloom's dissipated. So, you know, that's an issue, of course. It would also mean that maybe that algae incident wasn't what would be called an extensive bloom in any case. But follow up after that, I don't know that they do much. They confirm that there's a bloom, and they confirm the species to notify the health unit in case it's a hazardous algae bloom, a toxic one, so that the health unit can post notices and give residents the heads up that yes, this is a toxic bloom, you shouldn't be drawing water or swimming or that sort of thing. But in terms of follow-up to determine the extent, whether it's spread to the whole lake, how long it lasts, those sorts of things, I really don't think they do a good job in following up on those sorts of that sort of information. But really, you know, if you're really interested in that, you can always call the MECP to find that out. But that's been my experience anyway.
Maybe
Thanks,
I
Al.
could add a bit to that, Al. Is that possible?
Yep. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Yeah, just in terms of the process, Al is right, and this is what we have found also. For example, when we reported the golden brown algae bloom on the lake, the response was, well, yes, they confirmed that it was a chrysophyte bloom, and they just closed the file on it. They said we're closing the file because it's not considered a toxic bloom. So the extent, the duration was not recorded by the Ministry of the Environment. However, I think that Esther has kept a very scrupulous notes on this, and I hope, I'm not exactly sure that we've sent all photographs. We haven't sent everything. Perhaps between you and Esther, we can make sure that you do get all of that kind of data that we've already collected. In addition, I'd just like to mention that we have found the ministry increasingly quick in responding, very responsive now. They've even given us sampling bottles and given us instruction on sampling techniques that we can then sample when we find a bloom, and they will come and pick it up.
That's great. I'm sure there'll be lots of sharing of information yet between Esther and Al. Sounds like there's lots there. We've got a couple minutes left, so if there was anything else that wanted to be shared, I'm just going through again. I don't see anybody else. Esther wanted to, yep.
So, sorry, just so you understand, Al, when Ken mentioned 12 confirmed blooms in the last few years, they were confirmed either by the MECP or by the expert in Winnipeg, where we will send samples. So when we see a bloom that looks like blue-green algae or cyanobacteria, we will take a sample right away, and we will keep that sample in the fridge. And if the MECP says no, we can't come for several days, we will have that sample analyzed. We send it to them and they will send an email back. So it was confirmed not necessarily by the MECP every time, but by our own expert.
Actually, thanks for that. Yeah, the ministry has some other criteria other than just there is the presence of blue-green algae that are of certain species. They'll look at it for certainly the concentration of cells within that sample, determine if it's dense enough in their minds to form a bloom that's actionable to talk to the health unit and such. As Ken noted before, sometimes those, if a boat runs by and sort of disperses it and it doesn't show up again, then maybe it's not a bloom in their mind.
I can assure you that the person that we send them to in Winnipeg has in fact corrected the MECP on occasion when they identified the wrong species. And she also looks at, she will do an accounting chamber and determine, biomass, cells per cubic millimeter, etc. So we have full confidence in the results that we get.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Is that just an independent lab, Esther, an independent taxonomist in Winnipeg, or is she part of a government lab?
Ken, maybe you can respond to that. Hetty. Ken, are you
yes,
there?
her name is Hetty Klein. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Her name is Hetty Klein. She has been first collaborating with us, identified by Dr. Sue Watson as probably Canada's one of their best experts. And she's a very interesting person. She's not at all monetary, and she will often, the other thing that we didn't mention was that we do have a student microscope, which when we take a sample, my son, who's got his PhD in ecology, will put it under the microscope and can tentatively identify the species, but takes a photograph and sends it to Hetty. Within half an hour, we get the results back. And so we do have a very good collaboration with her.
Wonderful.
But it's not highly monetary. We have to pay for it occasionally, but it's not onerous.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's wonderful. It's great to have a relationship with somebody like that, because people that identify algae to species like that aren't a common breed, that's for sure.
Okay, it looks like we got maybe one last question here, Al, and then we'll close it up. Do we need qualitative criteria to distinguish what constitutes a significant or extensive blue-green algae bloom from a small or insignificant bloom, as well as classifying harmful blooms from non-toxic blooms? I'm not sure if you can answer that.
Yeah, qualitative. Not sure which qualitative sort of factors you'd be getting into. Maybe I'm going to try to read that chat again. Do we need qualitative criteria to distinguish what constitutes a significant or excessive blue-green algae? I think that the quantitative ones are the ones, of course, that the MECP are looking at. They're the density, they're the species, those sorts of things. So do we need to have a qualitative criteria? I don't think so. I think you want a quantitative one that certainly the qualitative observation of algae forming along the shoreline is what begins the process, but it's the quantitative ones that sort of define if it's a harmful and if it warrants action from the ministry side of things. As well as classifying harmful blooms from non-toxic blooms. And I think that's what Ken was getting at when he mentioned that the MECP sort of said, "Oh, okay, you've got a bloom of golden brown algae, Uruguayna, and we're just going to close the file on it because it's not toxic." That's fine, because that's their mandate. They want to know the harmful ones, and they want to take action on those by notifying the health unit and making sure that the residents are aware. Their mandate is not to understand those algae blooms. It's not their mandate to understand that the residents' enjoyment of their waterfront and the lake and the health of the ecosystem is being potentially impacted by that. So definitely the MECP does distinguish between harmful and non-toxic blooms, but maybe the association doesn't.
That's great. Thanks, Al. So we've got about 2 minutes left. So I'll just maybe give last word, Al, and then we'll head it back to Jackie. But do you want to just sum it up, Al?
Yeah, I did just again. It's great to see the enthusiasm and interest and want to be involved in the process. It's really fantastic. Please don't hesitate to send your information in if you have any. We want to get everything in, anything and everything into this study to just to make sure we get things right.
Great. Thanks, Al. And I want to say we really appreciate all the time that you've spent on this call. It certainly makes our job more interesting when we have a interested public, and it's very much appreciated. And with that, we'll send it back to Jackie for the close up from the district.
Thanks again, Francis and Al,
On camera.
for your work today. Thanks everybody for attending. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for all of the information that you've provided today and previously in the Dropbox. And we'll look forward to continuing to receive whatever you have to contribute. Just feel free to get in touch with me by email or phone, and we'll figure out the best way to do that. We do have a Dropbox set up that folks can contribute to, so I'm happy to share the link for that, or if it's easy, you can just email me whatever you'd like to share with Al and Francis. But don't hesitate to get in touch, and we'll figure out the best way to flow all of the information through to Al. So thanks again, everyone, for your time. Really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.